Yes, sir. So I would just turn them all off until. Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. So, how's this one? Full, okay, so you got full batteries on everything.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for your patience as we sorted out our AV issues, and thank you for being here today. My name is Sandhini Lena Gamage, and I'm currently a graduate student at the Nicholas School of the Environment here at Duke University, and I'm the current president of the Oceans at Duke Student Club. On behalf of the Oceans at Student Club, I would like to warmly welcome you all to our second annual Blue Economy Summit. And to those who attended our evening reception yesterday, we hope you enjoyed it and welcome back. I'd like to take a quick moment to recognize our sponsors and thank them for believing in our vision for this summit. As an entirely student-led event, your support goes a long way. I would also like to express my appreciation to our faculty advisors, John Verdon, Rebecca Vidra, Dan Vermeer, and Doug Novacek. Thank you for your guidance and support as we began planning this event 10 months ago. Planning an event of this proportion as students is truly a team effort. So please stand. Thank you, Natalie, for being the best conference chair I could ever ask for. No matter what challenge came our way, you were always ready to face it together. I don't know about you, but I'll find it strange to wake up tomorrow morning and not be Slack messaging you about BES tasks. To explain Oceans at Duke's mission, I'd like to share a quick story about my non-traditional pathway towards the ocean space. I'm from Sri Lanka, an island in the Indian Ocean. But ironically, it wasn't until I moved to New Mexico and Colorado, two states that are not near the coast, that I began to actively explore my passion for marine conservation. The more I learned, the more I realized there were many different challenges the ocean was facing. As a chemical engineer and environmental consultant, I was finding it difficult to figure out where I fit in this ocean space. After about 3 years of attending webinars, reading articles, watching documentaries, I finally found my niche. I came across an article on a hospitality chain conducting corporate responsibility efforts around ocean conservation initiatives. That was the moment where I found my place in this blue economy conversation, to use my background and sustainable business practices towards tourism, a sector that is highly dependent on a healthy ocean. The reason I shared my story is to shed light on our goal as a student club. We believe that an interdisciplinary community of professionals is needed to develop ocean sustainability solutions. We also hope to create an inclusive space where anyone can join the conversation on the blue economy, because we need diversity of thought and backgrounds to build impactful collaborations to push forward from commitments to action. As you all know, this year's summit is under the theme Recovery and Revitalization in the Pandemic Era. Today, we will dive deeper into how different sectors of the blue economy are addressing challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic posed on them. We will explore equity aspects in the fisheries sector, such as women's contribution to fisheries and the challenges the blue economy poses on small-scale fisheries. Our Tide Talk speakers will share their experiences on blue justice, priorities for the global south and small island developing states, and nature-based solutions for coastal resilience. The ability of communities to adapt to and recover from disruptions to weather conditions is becoming more important than ever. Therefore, our second panel will explore different case studies of coastal resilience and managed retreat. And finally, we'll explore how tourism organizations are readjusting their strategies to be more resilient, and learn about how coastal communities are being included in tourism initiatives for a more sustainable and inclusive ocean economy. Thank you to all our speakers for being with us here today. We're honored to have you in our presence. The marine and Fiona Williams. Asia is the Blue Economy Manager at the Waite Institute, as she examines how to help nations sustainably develop and diversify their economies whilst also establishing marine protection. Fun fact about Asia, she went swimming in a river in Nepal with crocodiles once, unknowingly. I can't imagine what that was like, Asia. Without any further ado,
Good morning, Sandini and everyone at the Duke Blue Economy Summit. Welcome to the second Blue Economy Summit that Duke is hosting. It's really a pleasure to be part of this initiative again. I was there last year in person, and I just want to say congratulations to Sandini and the organizing team again for hosting another fantastic summit. You guys have an array of amazing speakers lined up and panels and events. So I hope everyone that's there in person really does enjoy, and apologies that I could not be there in person this year, but thank you again for the invite, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this initiative. So I will start with the definition of the blue economy, but then I want to touch on something similarly to Sandini in terms of my passion for being involved in the blue economy space. So the blue economy is essentially defined as the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, job creation, and community well-being. And it spans a range of sectors, including renewables, fisheries, tourism, waste management, and shipping, as well as ocean innovations and other ocean-related industries. So just to talk a bit more about my passion and how I ended up working in this space, it really stems from my childhood. So I was born in the small island state of Trinidad and Tobago. And growing up, I used to love the reef, Baku Reef in Tobago. It really is an amazing reef. By a world-renowned oceanographer, it was rated the third best reef in the world. And I grew up loving snorkeling there. And as I got older, I dived there. And I saw over time that there was degradation happening. You know, I was seeing a loss of the reef and the fish species that I really loved. I went to study in England, and I learned about the impact of climate change on the reefs, and I really felt compelled to work in this space and do something about it, and hence that has really directed my academic and professional ambitions since then. And actually, 2 weeks ago, I was very fortunate to be back on that reef on a glass bottom boat with my 1-year-old daughter. And this for me was one of the biggest things that has happened to me in my life, because I was able to show her, she was able to hear the guide speak about the reef and the fish, and she was pointing and she was so engaged and loving it. And for me, this is what creating a sustainable blue economy is all about. You know, we inherit these natural resources and we have to hand them over to the next generation so that they are able to sustain themselves and live in harmony with nature. So anyway, I will go back onto the main crux of my talk now. But this really for me is a fundamental, even in the work that I do at Waite Institute, being able to work with local communities and get them front and center of guiding the process of what they want their blue economy to be, because without local communities, we cannot achieve a sustainable blue economy by any means. And it relies on a balance between the current economy that we have and really transforming it, as well as balancing the environment and societal needs. So I really see that blue economy can also not exist without marine protection. At the Waite Institute, we're guided by the 30 by 30 mission, so to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. And we work with a variety of nation states, such as Maldives, Bermuda, Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, and others in this area. And I'm based in Jamaica, so a lot of my examples might be Caribbean focused. But in terms of the importance of blue economy for resilience and part of COVID recovery, you know, the World Bank has estimated that the value added from the ocean is set to reach 3 trillion by 2030, and the increase in ocean-related professions will increase by 40 million. So this really provides an opportunity to diversify our economies, and then also considering the job losses and the economic shocks that came out of COVID, to really provide new opportunities for people and strengthen our economies. But we can only benefit from these potential opportunities and the revenue streams that the ocean provides with sustainable ocean management. So some people say sustainable blue economy. I just say blue economy because the blue economy cannot be anything without sustainability. It is inherently sustainable. So it's really important for building this resilience and allowing us also to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, such as SDG 13, climate action, SDG 14, life below water, and others, as well as the targets in the Convention for Biodiversity. And especially the blue economy is important for coastal states and small island developing states. So the COVID-19 pandemic had significant impacts on global economies as well as ocean-related industries such as fisheries, shipping, tourism, and renewable energy. You know, whilst the ocean is providing us with these huge economic benefits, there are also huge risks to the ocean in terms of climate change, warming, ocean acidification. At the moment, 90% of the excess heat that we produce as a global society is absorbed by the oceans, and this is really causing significant impacts on the ocean. That's all contained in the IPCC report on the ocean and cryosphere. We're experiencing overfishing of our existing fish stocks, as well as for many countries, including our Caribbean region, we are experiencing the threat of sargassum. The Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism actually estimates the cost of cleaning up the sargassum that is now flooding our beaches and our the natural environment that we have at 120 million. And this is a significant cleanup cost, but it also deters people from our high quality tourism product, which is our pristine beaches. And we're also experiencing, you know, invasive species as well as fish migrating out of warming waters. So these are all factors that are impacting the blue economy, but without tackling them, we cannot really maximize the benefits of the blue economy. And also the ocean has a crucial role to play in regulating climate and weather and providing us all with critical ecosystem services, nutrition, as well as, for me, the inherent intrinsic value of the ocean as well. You know, we currently use the ocean for trading. 90% of trade uses the sea routes, and it's a source of jobs for millions of people, as I mentioned earlier. So why is the blue economy so important in the post-pandemic era and in really strengthening our economies and creating this sustainable economy that we need so much? Well, the blue economy provides an opportunity for job creation. It can create new jobs in aquaculture. You know, aquaculture is currently the fastest growing food sector. We can look at job creation in ocean-based renewable energy, marine biotechnology, maritime transport, and it can also help offset the job losses caused by the pandemic. If we look at, for example, tourism-dependent nations that closed their borders, many people became unemployed overnight. And for small island states that don't necessarily have the safety nets that modern economies have, that literally meant people going hungry, not being able to send their kids to school, and having significant impacts on the household economy. In terms of economic growth, it has the potential to drive economic growth by sustainably managing and using our ocean resources to create new industries, products and services, and really strengthen our economies into the future by, for example, focusing on renewable energy. If we look at the dependency on fossil fuel and the market fluctuations in the price of fossil fuels, actually investing in renewables as part of a blue economy creates independence, and it provides price security and certainty, and it really also reduces the cost of energy so that business can operate cheaper, people can be paid more, and also it reduces the cost of living day to day for people in the household, so they have more disposable income to invest in their household and also in environmental goods and services. And overall, you know, we're on this journey towards sustainable development, and there's a lot of work to do. So the blue economy can contribute significantly to this, and it's responsible for the conservation as well as the use of ocean resources, which is crucial for the long-term economic and environmental sustainability that we all need. It can also help build this resilience into our economies. Actually, the pandemic showed just how vulnerable our economies are to external shocks, you know, changes in food prices because of imports, and actually the blue economy helps to build this resilience against future pandemics and other global challenges by supporting this diversification and creation of new opportunities, as well as protecting the less vulnerable to these type of disruptions. And also a really important factor is that the blue economy is really important for climate change mitigation. By preserving our ocean resources that act as carbon sinks, we are actually allowing the blue economy to contribute to mitigating the impacts of climate change and promote the sustainable use of the ocean, as well as transitioning towards renewables, offshore wind and wave power. These new and emerging technologies will be the future in terms of blue economy and renewable energy development, and they should really be harnessed in tandem with traditional knowledge and the wants and needs of local populations in balancing that sustainable agenda. So overall, the blue economy, it's a critical driver, I think, of the post-COVID recovery and revitalization. It can really support us in strengthening our economies and supporting disaster risk reduction, but also promoting sustainable development and environmental protection as a core, because what we are really doing is protecting that natural asset base that provides the spillover effect for fisheries and other goods and services that the ocean provides. So just to look a bit more at COVID-19, you know, it produced huge shocks to global economies, to small island states, to tourism-dependent nations like Jamaica. If we look at Jamaica, 34% of the GDP is derived from tourism. So if we close the borders and shut off tourism overnight, that's a third of the economy gone, the associated jobs, and the impact of those job losses on the fabric of society. And this happened in many tourism-dependent nations. And even in terms of reopening, we still saw the rise in tourism numbers has not necessarily reached pre-pandemic level. And the COVID-19 pandemic also contributed to mini recession and decreased business activity in the services sector, you know, and huge impact on supply chains, which then disrupted the cost of goods and services for everyday people. And we're still experiencing a lot of that today. So why is tourism so important in terms of COVID recovery and the blue economy? Well, tourism has traditionally been the bedrock for a lot of small island states. For the Caribbean region, for example, we have 80% more sea than land, and we have focused on developing a tourism economy. But actually, with the blue economy approach, we need to look at diversifying that tourism sector towards more ecotourism, health and wellness, and other opportunities. You know, the ecotourism market size was valued at around 181 billion in 2019, and it's set to double by 2027. So, you know, consumers are much more conscious, millennials as well, in terms of their impact when they are traveling and more generally. So diversifying the tourism product will benefit tourism dependent nations, but then also promote alternative livelihoods. So for example, if we are, for example, setting up a marine protected area in a particular location, by providing ecotourism and other opportunities, you're providing an alternative livelihood for fishers that are potentially affected by the establishment of a marine protected area. And also an important part of blue economy that's also overlooked is in terms of biodiversity protection, looking at ways that we can establish payment for ecosystem services, develop carbon markets, and look at the way the sequestration that mangroves and other ocean assets such as seagrass provide, and how they can really generate revenue streams to be plugged back into our environmental conservation and blue economy initiatives. You know, renewable energy is a huge focus of the transition towards a sustainable economy, and it really is a significant part of the blue economy as well, because if you take, for example, the Caribbean region, the CARICOM energy consumption is 92% fossil fuel, and this really shouldn't be the case in a region abundant with sun. We should be investing in solar and really be energy independent. This should be the case now and in the future. And therefore, you know, investing in renewables helps reduce our exposure to vulnerabilities and global market fluctuations because of wars, pandemics, and this type of thing. Whereas at the moment, we're seeing, for example, in Jamaica, we have a price per kilowatt that's 10 times the price of energy in Canada, and that's because of the lack of investment in renewable energy. So another core part of the blue economy is fisheries, and I want to actually emphasize that it's sustainable fisheries. You know, 3 billion people worldwide rely on seafood as their primary protein. You know, coastal communities are dependent on artisanal fishing, day-to-day fishing to provide for their households, to sell to markets, to feed themselves, but also to send their kids to school and to really build their household. And therefore, protection and sustainable management of fish stocks is really important, and to ensure that, you know, the larger fishing industry is not overfishing and damaging the asset base that so many people depend on as well. You know, we have a situation where there are currently 20 billion in harmful subsidies, and 20% of existing fish stocks are illegally fished. And transition to a blue economy means finding policy tools and implementation ways to mitigate these type of things, and really ensure that we have regional fisheries management, and that the people employed in the fisheries sector are getting their value added at all stages in the supply chain. You know, from the individual fisher that goes out to fish to the final product. And this is where I think aquaculture and innovative technologies can play a part, and then also sustainable extraction. So if we look at, for example, the Maldives, their method for extracting tuna is pole and line, because it's much more sustainable than net fishing and other methods, and therefore they have a premium product that is sustainable and also provides a huge contributor to their economy. And ensuring that we are taking the right size fish past reproductive stage and not buying or selling certain types of species out of season or during their breeding season is really important. And So as part of this, I really urge you to be a conscious consumer when you are purchasing seafood, knowing, where your seafood is coming from and understanding that supply chain, and also encouraging brands to be responsible in that way as well. And sustainable fisheries is really important because it provides food and nutrition for everyone globally, but especially coastal communities. It ensures the supply of critical nutrients. It's a healthy source of protein, and it also has a reduced environmental footprint. And it's really important to safeguard this blue food as a contribution towards nutrition. Fish stocks need protection, and that is a huge part of the work that we do as part of the 30 by 30 initiative in terms of understanding fish stocks, the health of fish stocks, their movement and migration due to climate change, and the ones that are critically at risk of collapsing or are prone to invasive species and other climate change related stocks. And these are matters of equity because small island states, they produce a lot of the value from the ocean, but they don't necessarily acquire a lot of the financial benefit in the same way because of distribution issues. So there's another core part of the blue economy that is overlooked, and that is really the potential of digital innovation and traditional knowledge coupled with small-scale solutions to provide this support for transition and for future generations to have new jobs that we might not know exist today, but really create these new opportunities to strengthen our economies and diversify. And the exclusive economic zones of small island states are massive. So it's seen as the new economic frontier, but it's also a way of life. It's also a fundamental driver of the natural environment, and it's also of significant intrinsic value to communities. And it's a principle of intergenerational equity that we hand these over in a better condition than we currently have them. So there's a few other areas, but time is limited. Finance, sustainable finance is actually core to developing this blue economy. We've seen already there's been some shifts in finance towards ESG and sustainable finance. There've been development of blue bonds and debt for nature swaps. And this is all really exciting for the future of the blue economy. And this makes me very hopeful because sustainable finance has a huge role to play. If we look at, for example, the climate change agreements, there's terms around common but differentiated responsibilities because not all nations have the financial means to mitigate and adapt in the same ways. And often the ones that are experiencing the impacts of climate change earliest are the least contributors and don't have the financial means. So if we look at the Caribbean region, we produce 1% of global emissions, but we're already experiencing the impacts of climate change. I have friends, that used to go to beaches that no longer exist because of sea level rise. And this is a really real threat. In the climate change negotiations, we also look at loss and damage, and loss and damage is also a significant principle because if we exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius in terms of warming, that has huge impacts on the reefs. The IPCC report shows that if we exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius, we will lose up to 90% of our reefs or more. And this is a huge risk because corals are estimated to generate about $375 billion a year in goods and services. And the reefs are home to a quarter of fish species, and they're drivers of tourism activities such as snorkeling and diving. So we really have to push this transition towards a sustainable blue economy because it will help to mitigate a lot of these risks. It will help us to adapt in the face of change, in the face of pandemics, and really help to strengthen our economies, build our society sustainably so that we can hand it over to the next generation in a better condition and really protect our natural environment that is the bedrock of our global economy and that we have been neglecting for so long. So just to close, you have 3 exciting panels that I'm going to keep an eye on and listen into on enhancing equity across the fisheries sector. And that's really exciting, some great speakers. You've got panels on cases of coastal resilience and managed retreat and rethinking sustainable tourism. And I'm really excited to hear the discussions and be part of it. But in closing, I have one video to show, which is from my Maldives project, where we're currently setting up a 20% no-take marine protected area whilst undertaking sustainable fisheries and blue economy projects. But just to say, I've been very lucky in my academic and professional career because of mentors and professional support. So please, to the students in the audience, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or via any means, and I would be happy to have a discussion with you on how you can really use your passions and your youth in shaping the future of the world that we really need. You know, you have the passion, the drive, you're on the right path already to do good and to support the transition and achievement of a sustainable blue economy that we need. So everything that we do from today onwards matters, and I'm just grateful that you're all involved and willing and part of this journey. So have a great Blue Economy Summit, and do keep in touch.
ನೂಕ್ಸೋದ್ ಬಿನಾಕುನ ಮಟ್ಟಕ ಏಗೆ ವರ ಮುಹಿಮ್ಮ ಅಸಾಸೆ ಮೀ ಕಣ್ಫಳು ಅದಿ ಮೀ ಗುದ್ರತಿ ವಸೀಲತ್ತ ದೆಮೆಹೆಟ್ಟನು ಗೊತಕ ಕುರಿಯ ಗೆಂದುವೇನು ಗೊತ್ತ ಮೀ ಬೆಲೆಹೆಟ್ಟು ಎಗೊತ್ತುಂ ಹಿಮಾಯಕುರವೆ ಸರಹದ್ದು ತಗಿವೆಸ್ ನೂಕ್ಸೋದ್ಗೆ ವರ ಮುಹಿಮ್ಮ ಅಸಾಸೆ ಮಸಕ್ಕದು.
We live and work in such a beautiful paradise. I think we should all work together to make sure that it remains to be so.
Hamayagienum Armen Vashagim Vakando Armen Divihin de Kilobe, Armen Divihinang et a Bavaro Nafang over the Armen Divihinge et a Bavaro Aida Taka Kabota Kitimedi Armen Vashagimiva Kandofalo. Ehenkamo Armen Sebajehe Armen Kando de Kilobiva. එතන්තන් බලහට්ට
අරවන හඬුපල් දෙකේ ලොබේ වසබරති මිනිමම් කමායි කොමාහොල රංගල මාහොලේ ගොරවේති අනුපල් වරිසු හොල මස්කෙක් පුරන් වලේ ඒ ආම්දනි ලෙවි.
My hope for the Maldives is for our future generations to be experiencing the things that our grandmothers and grandfathers talk about. My vision is people being able to experience the beautiful environment of the Maldives, and for us not to become a legacy under the sea. And I want to say to everybody, we will not sink if everybody works together.
Hi, I'm Toddy Steelman, Dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment. The Nicholas School is proud to support this year's Blue Economy Summit, which aims to create a creative collision space to think about sustainable solutions for our oceans. At the Nicholas School, we value interdisciplinary approaches that tackle the world's most complex problems, and the Blue Economy Summit represents the best in this tradition. Thank you very much for being part of this exciting event. I look forward not only to the conversations that we will have, but the creativity that you will all bring to making our oceans more sustainable.
Greetings, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the summit. It's very exciting, and really thank Asia for kicking us off and setting the scene. So my name is Angelique Pupono, and I'm a young woman from the islands of the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean. The Seychelles is known for its leadership in the blue economy internationally and domestically as well. It was one of the small island developing states who advocated for bluing the green at the Rio +20 conference. I've been given the task of speaking about an equity perspective on the blue economy. And as I take this opportunity to speak to a group of students who undoubtedly some may go into academia and some may go into the world of operationalizing many of the things that we're going to be speaking about, I decided to take a look at both. So let's start here. So although there is no universally agreed definition to the blue economy, if you turn to the literature, it says that there's about 4 possible interpretations or paradigms that the blue economy stands for. The blue economy as new livelihoods, the blue economy as new business opportunities, the blue economy to support small-scale fishers, and the blue economy as sustainability. But then it takes me down this extensive debate about whether the blue economy is more than business as usual. Instead, it paints a picture more focused on economy than the blue, a new frontier to exploit, a new opportunity for capitalism to thrive. In some instances, I'd go as far as to say that in some literature, it vilifies the blue economy. If it is so evil, then why would my country and countries like mine, who are so dependent on the ocean, our lifeline, be pushing for these narratives? But wait, someone has taken the time to write what island nations think. Some say, and in this instance, it's one particular writer, that it is different for small islands because it is linked to our cultural and traditional and spiritual linkage to the ocean. And I'm glad you've already heard from Asia, who shared her perspectives on blue economy and what islanders mean and feel about it. Like herself, for me, the blue also stands for sustainability. But the blue economy stories of islands are sometimes told, and Seychelles is one of the countries that has been studied the most in terms of the blue economy. Interestingly enough, many of those articles written have never consulted people from the Seychellois. We usually happen to come across the articles. When we reach out to the author, we are told we would have given biased answers, so it was necessary not to consult us. Instead, I read our story. It sounds like I am a coconut bra, grass skirt wearing person who uses my thumb to ink as signatories, controlled out of Washington, hypnotized by a few $1 million and a keen willingness to disenfranchise our fishers to please funders in Washington. All this intrigues me. Am I biased? Or should I also question who is holding the pen, who is generating literature, who is creating knowledge that others will then rely on? So as we think of blue economy and how it is to advance the COVID-19 recovery, we have to think about what knowledge is being generated out there and who is reading it and how it is going to be taken. So I am very concerned by the perspectives that dominate views on the blue economy and even blue economy and small island developing states specifically that are not written by scholars who are thinking of the implications, and many of whom are speaking of islands without understanding or being from islands, who have persuaded themselves to steer clear of acknowledging their own values and biases and present themselves as a neutral researcher. I think it is dangerous, especially when you tell the stories of others, especially when you consider who could be reading this and whether they will go on to invest in the blue economy of small islands that small islands have been so looking forward to. But if you look to the OECD statistics, you will see the hikes of amount in funding takes place where there is all this political momentum around blue economy, but then slowly starts to dwindle. So today, you get to hear my perspective. And I don't profess to be providing anything other than the views of a Black woman from a small island developing state on equity and the blue economy. We have often seen ourselves as small island developing states constrained by our landmass. It is in recent years that SIDS have turned to the potential of its huge economic zone, exclusive economic zone. SDG 14.7 identifies the sustainable ocean economy as what could support the development needs of SIDS as well as the least developed countries. Yet, since 2015, we have not seen the fruition of this target, and we only have 7 years left to make it happen. I am reassured that we're having conferences like this and the interest in this to see how to make it happen. We have 7 years before the expiration of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal Agenda. When I think of the blue economy, and again, this is my perspective, I imagine a blue economy where decisions are taken, where decision on activities are taken by first considering the health of the ocean, the impacts the activities will have on it, a sort of bluing of environmental impact assessments. I imagine when we take decisions about the development of an activity, we think of its effects on the climate system from start all the way to its finish, supply chains and all. We think of how to mitigate these at every point. I imagine that girls and boys in schools are equally learning of the opportunities it can provide. I imagine that women and men have equal access to those opportunities. I imagine that we have learned from our lessons and will not repeat what we have done to land as to the ocean. I imagine a country and its people prospering. I imagine a healthy ocean serving as the bedrock to our society. SIDS have highlighted the importance of the ocean since 1994. And although it was not called Blue Economy back then, and it really was this ocean agenda. But instead, we haven't seen it come to fruition as expected. That said, in most recent years, in this coming out of the COVID-19 recovery, we have seen these significant deals, a debt for nature swap of 363 million US dollars for Belize and 50 million US dollars for Barbados. It took some 8 years before the first debt for ocean conservation swap was replicated. It does have something to do with the ebbs and flows of the market economy. In 2008, when there was the global financial crisis, it was ripe for one. And now again, we hear these blue financing deals emerge again after the COVID-19, thinking about the COVID-19 economic recovery. So it's very telling as to when these things, when these deals come to fruition, and it is very much linked to the ebbs and flows of the market economy. But the question is, and we may have many discussions around whether these are right, whether they are structured right, whether they make sense. But the question is, how do we do this right? And I think a lot of what Asia has touched on provides a lot of detail. But I want to touch a little bit more on this equity, because equity has to be part of the answer. And let's put it all into perspective. Seychelles has 100,000 people. Yes, 100,000. 455 kilometers square in landmass and 1.35 million kilometers square in ocean. Oftentimes, we think small means manageable. But oftentimes, of course, it means significant challenges. For SIDS to develop its ocean space, it requires huge scientific and technological investments from monies it simply does not have. As recent as today, right now at the United Nations, countries are negotiating on questions of technology transfer. And technology transfer that had been committed to since the Law of the Sea Convention, that simply has not happened. We try again today at the UN. Hopefully we will have a treaty for the high seas soon. Further, it requires significant capacity strengthening, especially in marine science. But seldom is this provided, and if it is provided, many times it is one-off workshops that simply do not do it justice. We need to rethink modus operandi. We really need to rethink how things are being done. And the blue economy provides the best opportunity. In June 2022, the Alliance of Small Island States formalized a declaration on marine science and marine technology to provide guiding principles about when partnering with SIDS. It's certainly something worth taking a look at. So yes, it's true. We're islands that need external sources of funding. And yes, it's true. Funding does many times come with conditions. But does it have to mean that we have to adopt the funding agency's view of the blue economy? Or simply think about meeting the funders' key performance indicators? Should we not be developing this together? Should it not be ownership, needs, and interest based of the small islands or the nation that comes first? It is critical that SIDS develop our own national blue economy plans so we can be clear on what we need, what we aspire to, that we do not become a place for experiments or undertaking solutions we have no ownership of, and one that is simply depleting capacity than spending it on what is needed. But the problems are not all external. Equity has to exist within the countries themselves. Decisions are often made by a few about the many, often by men about everyone, including women. Such arrangements defeat what the blue economy can achieve. So rather than thinking of this purely sectorally, the blue economy is about good governance. It is about decision making in a fair and equitable way, starting with the right representation at the decision making table. So a challenge to all of you. When we think about the blue economy, we think about balancing preservation and production. I challenge you not to forget about the two other pillars, equity and good governance. What will you do to make your blue economy equitable? I thank you, and like at Asia, please feel free to reach out to me should you want to discuss more. Thank you very much.
Innovation Research Postdoctoral Fellow at Duke University. We are also welcoming Rocky Guzman, the Deputy Director of the Asian Research Institute of Environmental Law, Michael Hoffman, Director of Innovative Science at RARE, and we'll have virtually Paul Ajin Teti, Principal Fisheries Research Assistant from the Fisheries Commission from Accra, Ghana, and Mar Mancha Cisneros, Sustainable Seafood Project Manager at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, UC San Diego. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm Mel Cronin. It's really great to be here with you all and to moderate this fantastic panel. As I've told everyone I've met, it's my second work week. So I'm new here, but I'm just so happy to get the opportunity to speak with you all and to share the expertise of our wonderful panel. We're going to start off with some introductions. And I'll just start to my right. The panelists will give a 3-minute introduction and then we'll get into some questions.
So good morning, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rocky Guzman. I'm the Deputy Director of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law, and I'm an environmental lawyer by profession. My focus has really been on oceans law and policy. Previously, I was the lawyer and the policy campaigner of Oceana in the Philippines for half a decade, and then I move on to managing this organization, the environmental law, focused on Southeast Asia and the Pacific. But I also do a lot of work with the United Nations Environment Program at the regional level in Bangkok, and also at the Asian Development Bank on their Blue Economy program. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Just also a note that I'm also an alumna of Duke and a part of the Oceans at Duke. I was here last year. It's so surreal to be here today, and I'm incredibly honored to be here.
Thank you. Michael?
I think I have a few slides. So if somebody could bring up the slides, that would be useful. Just kind of introduce the organization I work for. Great, thank you. So my name is Michael Hoffman. I'm the Director of Innovative Finance at an international nonprofit organization called RARE. So RARE's mission is simple yet powerful: inspire change so people and nature thrive. The key aspect that I want to highlight as part of this panel is the change aspect. And at RARE, we believe that change mainly refers to behavior change, given that we believe that human behavior is one of the root causes of the issues that coastal ecosystems and coastal communities face. So RARE has four main programs. Fish Forever, which is our flagship program, focusing on small-scale fisheries. Lands for Life, which is an agricultural program currently focusing on the country of Colombia in South America. Climate Culture, which is a domestic program here in the US that focuses on individual and organizational climate action. And then kind of cross-cutting across all of our programs is an applied center for behavior and the environment, where we basically try to analyze and integrate behavior change related aspects into our programmatic activities. RARE has been around since the 1970s. We have operations in about 10 countries, just over 180 global staff, and our key flagship program, Fish Forever, currently operates in 8 countries, very importantly with 28 subnational governments. We work in close to 1,500 communities, and importantly, we also work directly with the fishers, and also we establish and coordinate the work of savings clubs in these communities. Our main countries that we work in are in Central and Latin America, in Honduras, in Brazil. In Africa, we work in Mozambique. And in Southeast Asia, we work in the Philippines and in Indonesia. At the core of Fish Forever is a management system, which we call Managed Access with Reserves, that has a lot of similarities with MPAs. The key aspect of MA plus Rs is that they are jointly developed, jointly led, and jointly managed by the local community as well as the local government. Furthermore, MARS focus basically in terms of their geographical location on the first 2 nautical miles. So a vast majority of the ecosystems that are so valuable are basically included within those 2 nautical miles. And that brings me to the importance of the territorial seas. So within the first 12 nautical miles, we basically have 100% of mangroves, 100% of seagrass, and almost all of the world's coral reefs. Yet, as we have seen, SDG 14 is chronically underfunded. So even though all this value is within the territorial seas, what we've seen is that SDG 14 is one of the least funded and invested SDGs. And we all know that small-scale fisheries are very important in terms of employment, employing, I think, around 98% of all fishers globally and producing half of global fish catch. And then finally, what we do as part of the Innovative and Sustainable Finance initiative at RARE is we focus on both bottom-up as well as top-down initiatives. I'll get into some of these aspects later on, but just to give you a brief overview, top-down, we, for instance, work on a parametric insurance product. We work on an outcomes-based financing mechanism, which may or may not be an impact bond. We have currently a seaweed farming TA and loan facility. and we work in the blue carbon space. And in terms of the bottom-up activities, we have savings clubs. We work with an app that automatically creates financial statements for fish buyers. We also work with the micro businesses, the vast majority of which are informal, to basically get them into the formal economy. And finally, we have a livelihood insurance program. Thank you.
With our virtual panelists. So Paul, take it away.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I am Paul Agintete from Fisheries Commission, Accra, Ghana. And the Fisheries Commission is the implementing agency of the Ministry of Fisheries and Aquaculture Development. So the ministry formulates the policies, and we at the Fisheries Commission implements the policies. And we have to make sure at the end of the day, their policies and their management rules and the fisheries laws are being implemented at the fishing grounds. Yeah. So basically, I am a principal fisheries research assistant. I have 13 years of experience in the management of the marine fisheries resources, and I play key roles in Fisheries Commission and European Union projects with the aim of contributing to sustainable fishery resources management and also to improve food security, nutrition, and livelihood of small-scale fishes. Currently, I'm doing a project on the impact of offshore oil and gas on the marine fisheries and mitigation measures. You know, I have a hybrid background in oil and gas management and ocean governance, specializing in marine fisheries. I'm very happy to be part of this panel, this ABO panel, to discuss about it, enhancing equity in the fisheries sector. Thank you very much.
Mar.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you all can hear me. My name is Mar Mancha Cisneros. I am Sustainable Seafood Project Manager at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at University of California, San Diego. I am part of the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation, where I work in the Sustainable Seafood Initiative, which is Scripps' a new initiative on focusing on the intersection of sustainable fisheries management with seafood supply systems to address the question, how can we provide sufficient seafood to feed needs of a growing population while safeguarding the oceans so that they can provide food and nutrition security today and in the future. Our vision with this initiative is to advance ocean stewardship, to effectively communicate on the sustainable seafood landscape so that multiple stakeholders and audiences can come together to learn, exchange ideas, innovate, and re-envision the seafood system, basically linking what we know about fish to what we know about food. We focus on broad themes, connecting key disciplines of sustainable development, such as environmental, economic, social, cultural, across small-scale, middle-ground, and large-scale fisheries, bridging the center's expertise in fisheries biology, ecology, economics, and policy, with involvement and impact in food systems. We focus on 3 general themes: climate and fisheries, food and nutrition, and cultural and historical approaches to seafood and sustainability. In our aim is to serve as a catalyst for broad engagement and corporate responsibility towards sustainable and equitable seafood systems by focusing on 3 key objectives. Focus on science by leveraging our expertise to build complementary scientific competence in fisheries food systems and seafood markets, expand our education and training opportunities, and invest in research collaborations across the sustainable seafood space. We also focus on engagement and communication to facilitate collaboration on the seafood supply chain space, seafood sustainability, and culinary innovation. And then finally on capacity development. So strengthening access to information that's needed to improve sustainability in fisheries and seafood supply chains. And previously, I was a postdoctoral associate at Duke University, at the Duke University Marine Lab. I worked with Javier Basurto on the Illuminating Hidden Harvest project, the contributions of small-scale fisheries to sustainable development. I was technical lead for the project. We are launching our final report on it in less than a month now, in 2 weeks actually, on March 16th, where we really focused on the documenting and showcasing, highlighting the contributions of small-scale fisheries to the social, the environmental, the economic dimensions of sustainable development, as well as the governance aspects surrounding small-scale fisheries. And I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Clearly, we have a lot of expertise and knowledge. So I want to get to our panelists' questions. But before we do so, I just wanted to situate us and throw some facts and figures out around equity and small-scale fisheries. And these facts, as Mar just mentioned, are from the Illuminating Hidden Harvest project, which is a really incredible effort led by Mar, John Verdon, who I know is here, and Javier Basurto and others, in collaboration with groups like FAO and WorldFish. As Mar said, the launch is coming up and there's a virtual option. So I very much encourage you to attend if you're interested on March 16th. But I just wanted to share some of the figures that this group came up with, because they really are very impressive and I think set the scene for the conversation we'll have today. So this report looked at the contributions of small-scale fisheries to sustainable development in 58 countries around the world. And they found that these small-scale fisheries contribute 37 million tons of fish catch, representing 40% of the global catch. And they employ at least partially 492 million people, including 90% of the world's fishers. So obviously, thinking about equity in fisheries, small-scale fisheries are a very, very important part of the puzzle. That being said, with that in mind, I want to start with our questions. So the first question, and I'll just go down the line. Based on your work and experience, what do you see as the major barriers to equity in small-scale fisheries globally? And we'll start with you, Rocky.
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. And also just for context, I am based in Manila in the Philippines. So my perspective is from that part of the world, Southeast Asia and in the Pacific as well, right? Which is quite different in some aspects. So as a lawyer, I was thinking about when you asked this question, like it's always good to start with definitions and like the premise of what equity is. Generally, equity is defined as a fairness, like in different aspects. But also, it's generally agreed upon to cover three things in terms of equity. We have the substantive parts of equity, which includes recognitional equity, recognizing the groups and their response to the impacts to the environment. And also, we have distributive equity, which is making sure that the risks and the benefits are shared fairly by all. But my focus is really on procedural equity. This is something that we don't really talk as much. Okay, perfect, great. We don't really talk as much in these conversations. So a lot of the meetings and discussions are made by lawyers and government policymakers, but it's very important. Procedural equity deals with making sure that the process in decision-making in the environment, in the oceans and fisheries are fair, are transparent, and are accountable. In the context of the blue economy, this is quite challenging because in the risks in the blue economy, it's focused mostly on the environment and not as much on social issues. But this exacerbates like the power dynamics. There are limited powers of small-scale fishers, and especially in the face of the consolidation of more powerful businesses within the ocean space, right? So it's important to have the procedural equity in check as well, right? And what's this procedural equity? In my experience, because we are dealing in Southeast Asia of a regional framework for procedural environmental law, this deals with what we call access rights. If you've heard of this, this is the key pillars of sound environmental governance. So it covers access to information, and flowing from that, we have proper information, we have public participation decision making that is meaningful, not just a tick in the box. And because we have that information, we can file claims. This is access to justice and access to effective remedy. And these are what we call the access rights, the pillars of environmental governance. No? And we also have the enabling environment for the people, for the public, and the environmental defenders to exercise these rights. No? Now, in the context of the blue economy, it's not as mainstream yet, these access rights. And the challenge answering your question, Melissa, is that there is actually a lack of an enabling framework for these access rights, especially in the context of the fishery sector. Not just in the fishery sector, but the ocean space as well. It's mostly been focused on terrestrial issues. We have environmental impact assessments for infrastructure projects, if there are bridges, if there's displacement because of roads and all these. But in the ocean context, in the ocean space, it's not as mainstream as much. So this procedural equity is very important, and we need to address this lack of enabling frameworks for access rights and environmental procedural equity and procedural environmental law.
Thank you. Michael.
So one of the key barriers that we've experienced at RARE is sector informality. In the countries that we work, every other year or so, we carry out household surveys. And as part of those household surveys, we really try to understand the situation on the ground. And what has come out of those household surveys is that a very, very large percentage of the micro businesses that work, in coast are informal formed. And that high percentage reflects a number of perceived but also real barriers. So very often these micro businesses, which in the vast majority of cases is basically just the husband and the wife, maybe with one or two additional people kind of helping, them being afraid of potential tax implications. So they want to avoid paying taxes, or they're just uncertain what kind of tax implications form of business may have. Another perceived barrier is with respect to formalization, what other kind of requirements they may have to meet. Do they have to, for instance, produce audited financial statements? Those are kind of uncertainties that these informal micro businesses basically face. And what we do as a result of these real and perceived barriers is we basically provide capacity building to these micro businesses to really demonstrate the value proposition of formalizing their micro businesses. Because we obviously don't want to force them to formalize their business unless it's actually beneficial to them. So what we do in each of our countries, we basically carry out a study that really demonstrates the value proposition of microbusiness formalization. It looks at the aspects of what are those real and perceived barriers? How can we address them? What is the legal and regulatory situation? Do they actually have to pay taxes? If so, how much? And what we've seen is, for instance, that in a number of countries, micro businesses, especially the small ones, the really small ones, one or two employees, they, especially after COVID, they basically got tax breaks of 3 to 5 years. And in one of our countries, those tax breaks have actually now been made permanent. So that's just one kind of key barrier that has been addressed through that study, through that capacity building. And we also do a lot of hand holding for those micro businesses. So we basically carry out workshops where we present the findings of these studies, where we provide them with brochures and flyers, access to information, a step-by-step kind of guide in terms of how to formalize, where to go. Is it possible to do it online? Are there any costs involved? And we typically invite local kind of partners, very often public or semi-public entities that help with that process. And we've had success in one country just recently where we invited, I think, 18 micro businesses. And in the end, word spread, and through word of mouth, in the end, we had over, I think, 25. Some cousin got invited. Hey, this is great. So this kind of capacity building has really proven to be effective to address one of those key barriers, in this case, sector informality.
Fascinating. Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so thank you for the question. Before I tackle the question, I just want to give you a brief overview of the fishery sector in Ghana. You know, in Ghana, the fishery sector has been a long pillar of our economy, you know, contributing significantly to the socioeconomic development in the country. Our fishery sector in Ghana generates over $1 billion US in revenue, you know, and contributes at least 4.5 of our GDP. That's the gross domestic product. The sector, that is the fishery sector in Ghana, basically employs about 10% of our population. You know, Ghana, we are a small country in West Africa, but we are about 30 million people in the country, and the fishery sector employs about 10% of this population. So you can see how important the fish sector is in Ghana. You know, yes. But according to the FAO report in 2021, the small-scale fishes, including Ghana small-scale fishes, they land more of fish. About 90% of the fish that they land, the 90% is coming from the small-scale fishes, and it's either sold or consumed by the population, you know. But this is a sad point, you know, the barriers of the small-scale fishes in the fisheries industry. Despite their numbers in the community, they are often overlooked when it comes to fisheries management problem-solving processes. They are underrepresented, that's the small-scale fishes. Look at their numbers, and they are underlooked. So this is a kind of barrier in the small-scale fisheries, you know. And if we move on to the fishing industry, offshore, when it comes to competition, small-scale fishes are at a disadvantage. Look at their nets, they have small nets, they have hook and line, and they have other means of fishing. But if you compare them with the industrial fishes, they are at a disadvantage. So these are kind of the barriers, you know, small-scale fishes face during their fishing activities. And when it comes to fisheries management solving processes, they are often underrepresented. So I think for me, from my perspective, I think we can solve this issue by giving them a fair representation in the fisheries management process solving committees at the national level. And I believe in bottom-up approach. Instead of the top people gathering and seeing what they can do to help the small-scale fishers, I think they should come to the grassroots, see the fish processors, talk to them, see their problems, how best we can help them. Then we can move from the bottom-up approach. If you move from bottom-up approach, there's a lot of benefits, you know, because you see the real problems on the ground, you solve them before you make policies that will affect them. So I think we should involve them in decision making, and two, we should also involve them in policy making that will affect them directly or indirectly. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for the question. So yeah, I think for me, in speaking from the perspective of the Illuminating Hidden Harvest project and what we found, I think our focus on this project had a departure point in terms of what information is accessible about small-scale fisheries that could help decision makers properly account for small-scale fisheries. We often hear problems that these fisheries are data deficient. And through this project, we looked at the particular problem through the lens of multiple dimensions to better understand where exactly these gaps are coming from. What are the roots of these data deficient situations, and how these issues affect opportunities, access, and visibility of the small-scale fisheries sector, which translates to major barriers in equity, right? When competing with other economic sectors. And one of the biggest barriers that I want to highlight is the legal recognition of small-scale fisheries in each country, within the appropriate data accounting systems and data collection systems in country to fully understand the sector in each country was, as we found, a huge barrier in really learning globally what the figures look like for small-scale fisheries. There are huge limitations to the type of information that can be compiled, that could be accessed to learn about the status of small-scale fisheries and the reach and the breadth of their contributions, where they can contribute to the country's economies and people's livelihoods. Therefore, there's a lot. Without this recognition, we found more instances of a lack of visibility towards the sector that may not figure significantly in terms of GDP or when compared to other food production sectors like agriculture in the country. But it still has valuable contributions per capita or to specific populations in the country. And this remains hidden without that formal framework that recognizes this fishery. So that was one thing that I think comes strongly from what we found. Another aspect, which I know we'll talk about more later on, is that of gender blind small-scale fisheries policies and the lack of capacity to implement those that do exist that account for the role of women in small-scale fisheries. And I know we'll talk about this more later, but it's certainly in the initiative, in the project, we try to maintain gender as a cross-cutting theme across all the different dimensions that we explored, to try to find where it's really a weak point in terms of accounting for the contributions to small-scale fisheries to sustainable development, and hiding the role of women remains hidden in most of these cases. A lot of it due to the systems being not departing from gender disaggregated data, not considering activities that where women are mostly associated with or highly participant in the fisheries, etc. And then the last thing I want to mention is the access to markets. In my current work at Scripps with the Sustainable Seafood Initiative, we currently work in collaboration with industry partners and club membership-like business structures in Central and South America. And as they are navigating the installment of their own sustainable seafood procurement corporate policies, they hope to be able to rely more locally on supply of fish coming from small-scale producers or artisanal fisheries for specific times of the year. But they encounter significant barriers when comparing they consider metrics of sustainability to other products that they can obtain from elsewhere. So, for example, certifications is a big component of this, and in the scale of fishing companies and industrial actors, especially when it comes to being recognized for having sustainable practices, these companies rely on internationally recognized certifications that are often inaccessible to small-scale producers due to multiple reasons, prohibitive costs, etc. So right off the bat, they get dropped off consideration when, in fact, a lot of their fishing practices may very well be satisfying sustainability requirements that these companies can rely on. And so that's another barrier that I found in my work that limits the participation of small-scale fisheries in some of these markets.
Thank you, panelists. We're going to move on in the interest of time, and I'm just going to ask the panelists to try to keep answers to maybe about a minute or so. We have so much to cover and so much to get through. But I wanted to jump now to the small-scale fishers call to action, which you can see projected here on the screen. And I'll very briefly read it. So the call to action calls on governments to urgently secure preferential access and co-manage 100% of coastal areas, guarantee participation of women and support their role in innovation, protect small-scale fisheries from competing blue economy sectors, and be transparent and accountable in fisheries management. And finally, build resilient communities to face climate change and offer prospects to youth. I want to talk a little bit about this, and I might call on each of you sequentially to answer different parts of these questions. So the first question, probably for Michael and Paul, though others are welcome to jump in. What are some challenges that you see in your own work from the blue economy posing specifically to small-scale fisheries? And maybe you can speak a little bit to the actions that your organizations are taking to support small-scale fishers and stakeholders in your work. Michael.
So the formatization aspect is kind of a very important aspect that we continue to address. And it not only presents the kind of challenge that, for instance, governments are unable to really capture the value that the sector produces in the first place. And in that case, also to include budget line items at the national and subnational level for small-scale fisheries. So in addition to that kind of trickling down, what we've also seen is that there are just kind of operational challenges for the fishers themselves. So, given the tragedy of the commons challenge and the fact that coastal waters need to be sustainably managed, in some of our countries, what we've seen, for instance, is one specific kind of challenge being blast fishing, which is a very destructive way of fishing, for instance, and which affects, obviously the fish catch, which then kind of that challenge moves up the value chain then as well. And it's particularly tricky because typically blast fishing can be addressed through kind of like, regulatory mechanisms. So you can just ban it. But what we've seen is that even if that is in place, surveillance and especially enforcement of that ban is a huge issue in terms of resources. So not only are subnational governments and the entities that do the enforcement chronically underfunded, there's also jurisdictional issues where, for instance, surveillance is kind of under this jurisdiction of one entity, but enforcement is part of another entity's kind of scope of work. So that's just one kind of a specific kind of application here.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I come in?
Yes.
Perfect. So as we have seen in the keynote address, the United Nations defined the blue economy as the sustainable use of the ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods, and jobs whilst preserving the health of the ocean resources. So as it stands now, the blue economy is growing. We have oil and gas production, offshore oil and gas production. We have shipping industry. We have the fishery sector. We have tourism, and we have recently there's a debate on seabed mining. It's also part of the blue economy, which is growing. So when you look at these large blue economy sectors and compared to the fishery sector, the small scale fishers, you can see they are disadvantaged to these giant ocean resources users, and it is very important to address this issue. So from my perspective, I think maritime special planning, MPAs or MPS, if every country would develop such a plan that will demarcate the ocean resources and how they can use the ocean profitably, I think it will solve the problem and it will aid small-scale fishers. Just imagine small-scale fishers in Ghana, they have to fish around the 30-meter water depth zone. But at times, the large-scale fishers, like the tuna vessels and the industrial vessels, also comes down to the 30-meter water depth, which is illegal, in our EEZ, that's the economic exclusive zone in Ghana. We have where the small scale fishers have to fish and where the industrial and semi-industrial fishers have to fish. But at times, the semi-industrial and industrial fishers comes to where the artisanal fishermen are, and it creates a lot of problem. But if we have developed the MPS or MPEs, that's the marine protected areas, it will demarcate the shipping zones, the oil and gas zones, and it will demarcate where the small-scale fishers are supposed to fish. If this is done, I think there will be equity in the sharing of the marine resources. So that's what I think we should employ the MPEs into our policies and make sure it works. I think when the system is working this way, we can ensure equity in the fishery sector. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you both for that really interesting stuff. And I want to talk to our other two panelists about sort of another side of this issue regarding the call to action, especially to Rocky and Mar. So what are some legal and policy frameworks and enabling conditions based on the work you're both doing that should be in place to achieve equity in the fisheries, small-scale fisheries sector?
Thanks, Melissa. These are very important questions and following through with their responses. So there's really the need to address the lack of these enabling frameworks that I've mentioned earlier, right? So this could be the tools that are necessary for participatory, inclusive processes and decision-making, participation decision-making that is clearly meaningful, right? This could be in the form of legislation, regulation, or planning processes. So for now, we have, I mentioned EIA for the terrestrial issues, but MSP or marine spatial planning is not as mainstreamed. In a lot of countries, especially in the global south, we have fisheries management plans in fisheries management areas, and these are the platforms where small-scale fishers can actually participate meaningfully and have their voices heard, right? But it's not that mainstreamed as much. We have MSPs and the spatial plans, and they provide for the platform to have competing users optimize the uses of the oceans and reduce conflicts and actually encourage coexistence. But that hasn't been mainstreamed as much. And including here is the lack of enabling conditions itself. Like even if we have that process, we have the marine spatial planning process where people can participate, small-scale fishers and other groups disproportionately impacted by environmental impacts. Sometimes we have to make a deliberate and particular effort to engage these people, right? Because there's an actual power imbalance that's happening, right? So we have to reach out more to the people, to the small-scale fishers, and what their needs are to actually engage meaningfully in the process. So we do that, for example, in my experience as a campaigner for Oceania at the national level in the Philippines, we have fisheries management classrooms for small-scale fisherfolk, for example. That's where we teach them, or like we share with them what their rights are and what the remedies would be in case there would be violation of these rights. So these being like engaged, being meaningfully participating in many ways, it didn't take overnight. It was a long time of teaching them or familiarizing them of what their rights are and how they could use their rights in actuality, right? And that's important at the government level to have that legislation, regulation, and the planning processes to make sure that public participation and access to information and access to effective remedy exists as a channel in case there are grievances in the system for small-scale fisheries. That's for government. But there's also this side, very particular to the blue economy side, to the private sector. there's now a push for responsible business conduct and having a business which considers also human rights and equity considerations, right? So there are a number of principles for this, like the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, for example. The OECD has guidelines for responsible business conduct. All these that would ensure that businesses actually conduct business responsibly and ensure that social dimensions are also integrated within their strategies for their operations and businesses. So both these sides, government and business and the private sector, should go hand in hand in ensuring that a holistic approach, a legal and policy framework for small-scale fisheries and other groups disproportionately impacted.
Thank you. And Mar, did you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that very well said in the last response. I think the only thing I would add is from the perspective, again, of the IHH initiative, for the small-scale fisheries guidelines, right? The voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication it was a departure point as a great framework for countries to follow. But the real difficulty, as we found, and as I agree with our panelists, lies within each country's own legal and policy frameworks. And like I mentioned earlier in my previous response, even starting with how countries legally and formally recognize small-scale fisheries has huge implications for how much support they can provide to the sector, how the information gets quantified and taken into consideration in decision making. So that's where the real challenge is. Once a country decides to abide by the guidelines, it's something that we hope to work in the next phase of IHH to come down to country level and work more closely with stakeholders to, given what we learned, explore more concrete pathways for recognizing the sector in all its different dimensions. We recommend that from what we found that there's more effort needed to create these local enabling conditions for them to be able to exercise their tenure rights, for small-scale fisheries to exercise these rights, either through local supporting institutions such as civil society organizations or decentralized fisheries agencies that have clear roles and responsibilities. That's one recommendation, as well as improving the clarity of the mechanisms for participation in national decision-making processes. We found that the majority of formal small-scale fisheries policies that grant management rights to fisheries only have jurisdiction in small geographic areas and not through the entire country. And so as a consequence, a fisher's ability to participate and influence these national level decision-making processes is likely very limited. So developing these national level spaces for the participation of fisheries, the organizations that they participate in and the supporters could help address these limitations. And so one of our key recommendations that has come out of this is that this partnerships and joint efforts, collaborations by governments, fish workers and organizations, researchers, development agencies, and other stakeholders are indeed necessary to secure this their rights. And I think all three partner organizations involved in the IHS study have this mission quite clear and present in their current work. And it's one of the key principles behind how the initiative was developed and hopes to continue to move forward in the next phases.
Thank you, Mar. Thank you, panelists. That was very interesting. Our next question, and we only have about 10, 12 minutes left, so I'm going to speed through this, but our next question is related to some of these rights that many of you have brought up, particularly rights and management for Indigenous peoples. So we're interested in this question, understanding in the context that you're familiar with, how can the blue economy help promote Indigenous rights and resource management? And what challenges remain or are currently posed by the blue economy? I'll open that up for anyone who wants to volunteer, and maybe we'll just take one or two answers. Any panelists? Yeah, Rocky?
I can start, coming from the Global South and having worked with Indigenous peoples too. So it's important to recognize the traditional knowledge that Indigenous people we hold, right? And that's important. There's importance for guiding customary management of resources, including fishery resources. No, but the reality is, for example, in the Philippines, it's really marginalized. IPs are really marginalized, even though we have legislation and frameworks that protect them, and they don't have much of a seat in the table, a voice in the table, right? But there is a lot of ongoing developments, especially at the international and also the national level. For example, if you look at the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, all proponents of projects have to conduct or secure a free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, for Indigenous peoples in case there are projects that would affect them, like adversely, or any impact to them. So this should be done in all national projects, and in all, including fishery projects, those that might affect like other parts of other businesses that might affect the fishery resources of a community that indigenous people. And this should also be incorporated in national law through indigenous people's rights frameworks, laws in their respective countries. So for example, for us, we have litigated some cases on using the constitutional right to a healthy environment, but also like preferential access to fishers, small-scale fishers, and also indigenous peoples over their ancestral domains, ancestral waters, and make sure that they actually get the secure FPIC, the processes are in place, and also what's due them under the laws and legal frameworks in place.
Thank you. Do any other panelists want to weigh in? Well, our next question is sort of leading out of that question. So in international and industrial fisheries in particular, there's a lot of discussion these days around global north, global south, as well as interactions between small scale fisheries and these industrial fisheries. So for this question, we're interested in how can we guarantee equal decision-making power between global north and global south countries? And how do we achieve equity in global fisheries governance? Pretty big question. Maybe Michael, we can start with you.
To be perfectly honest, given that we're mainly working in the communities, I think the other panelists may be more to answer this question.
Let's all.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. For my perspective, I think we should have a consolidated fisheries policy. Already we have the UNCLOS, the United Nations Law of the Sea, which is a customary law that governs the operations on the sea, being it oil and gas production, fishing, shipping, tourism, cruise ships, and the rest. It's already there to govern the operations in the marine space, right? So I think there should be a collaboration and consolidation of all policies globally to ascertain which resources we are supposed to explore. As I said earlier, recently there's a conflict between investors, how they want to engage in seabed mining, engage in seabed mining, and there's a conflict. In some countries, they are saying there should not be seabed mining because it will have effects on the marine mammals. In other countries, they are saying they can mine responsibly and sustainably, but we don't know the practices they were employed to mine in the seabed. So I'm thinking, from my perspective, there should be a consolidated policy to protect the marine habitats. So if we have such a consolidated policy, it will help safeguard the marine environment now and in the future. Yeah.
Mara, would you like to add to that?
Yes. I mean, again, it's I come back to this cyclical problem that small scale fisheries tend to face when being cataloged into the data deficiency problems. while it's true that the small-scale fishery sector has increasingly been acknowledged for their importance in producing food and employment to millions across the globe, and they're receiving increased attention in research, highlighting their complexity in terms of governance mechanisms, fishing methods, modes of operation, labor organization, cultural values, range of targeted species, ecosystems, the whole diversity spectrum of small-scale fisheries seems to sometimes hinder also the attempts at thoroughly understanding small-scale fisheries and their precise measures for their multi-dimensional contributions. This continues to be a challenge at global scales when thinking about the world, and this further exacerbates their marginalization as in decision making. So I think in some ways this cyclical problem where the more complex and diverse and complicated the subsector is recognized, it's harder to document their contributions for producing estimates that require, for example, comparing small-scale fisheries across different countries or compared to other production sectors. We struggle with the issue of, there is no universally recognized definition of small-scale fisheries that could be used to facilitate these processes for recognition, and so there's less guidance for countries to properly document their contributions as well. So this continues this process of marginalizing the country-level decision-making policies and data collection efforts for small-scale fisheries to the fishers involved in this productive activity, and this positive feedback loop that it's just gets harder to break. So I think especially with the growth of other sectors, including aquaculture, and it gets harder for small-scale fishers to have a voice in how they can contribute to sustainable development, to the blue economy. So it's important that this role does not get discounted because of the complexity behind it, or begins receiving less attention when compared to other sectors, simply because it's more difficult to quantify.
Thank you both for those answers. So we're going to shortly transition into some audience Q&A, but before we do that, I want to end on a little bit of a hopeful note. So I really want to hear from each of the panelists what gives you hope. What are some promising solutions, initiatives, innovations, strategies that you feel can make real impact for improving equity in small-scale fisheries? In just about a minute each. The impossible task. Rocky, would you like to start?
Sure. I'll go ahead. 1 minute. So what really excites me now with what we do with the REL, with the Asian Institute for Environmental Law, is that we're doing an environmental rights framework for the Southeast Asia, which institutionalizes these access rights that we've been doing. So it could be a treaty or an agreement for Southeast Asian countries. And this would ensure that there would be access to information, public participation, and access to justice for all actors in the environment, especially those marginalized, small-scale fisheries included. So this is quite exciting because there's a need to have more concrete action. All this equity, we hear it all the time, but we don't have the concrete legal frameworks to latch on to ensure that this is implemented on the ground, and governments should implement it, and the people have the right to make it enforceable through maybe filing claims or litigation and all those. So that makes me excited and keeps me up at night, actually, in a good way. But what gives me hope, because in all these, what I've been doing in the past 8 to 10 years is I've been working with environmental defenders, ocean defenders. I know personally of fisherfolk leaders who have what has been killed because of their advocacy. One has been bedridden. So it's really a huge issue in the global south, and it's something that we need to address. Not a lot of people know about these issues, but it is a real issue. It's not just a parrot, it's a real issue in the global south, in the Philippines where I'm from. So what for me, what gives me hope is that we have to defend these ocean defenders. We have to defend the environmental defenders, because they're not doing it just for themselves or for their livelihoods, but it's also for the future generations and generations yet unborn. And it's only right to make sure that they are protected and have an enabling environment to protect to defend their rights and protect their rights for all of us.
Really well said. Michael?
So what gives me hope is the emergence and the applicability of innovative and sustainable financing instruments to the blue economy context. So one specific example that we're currently pursuing at RARE is we're looking at outcomes-based financing instruments that have been successfully applied to other sectors, and we're trying to see how we can actually apply them to the blue economy. So we're trying to basically reduce the dependence of the small-scale fishery sector on grant funding. So we're trying to crowd in private capital. And one thing that we're doing right now is we're carrying out a feasibility study for what may, in the end, be the first small-scale fisheries impact bond globally. We're doing that in Indonesia, and I just got back from a field trip to Southeast Sulawesi where we had our first due diligence trip. And what we can specifically do in terms of equity is we can integrate equity into the metrics that then trigger the payout to the outcome funder. So you have an initial investor that basically pays the service providers to carry out the activities, in our case, to basically establish MARS and to carry out formalization activities. And then those activities will be independently monitored and evaluated. And then an outcome funder comes in, and depending on the results achieved, then the payment will be basically channeled back to the initial investor. And what we can do is we can integrate equity-related metrics into those payment triggers. And that's something that that gives me hope.
Wow, exciting. Paul.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic and I'm very hopeful about the future in the fishery sector in Ghana. One of the key points is we have the Fisheries Management Plan of Ghana, which is a national policy for the management of the marine fisheries resources. So we are trying to implement the plans that we have and trying to promote equity in the governance of the marine fisheries resources. And we have also, with the help of the World Bank, empower women, and we have created an institution or organization or association called the National Fish Processors and Traders Association. That's NAFTA. That association is established in March 2015 to empower women, to make sure women also take part in decision making, policy making, so that the policies and the laws that will be made against them, they should be aware of the fisheries industry, what is going on. Formally, women are not part of decision making, but due to this intervention, they are part of our decision making. Formally, fisheries and small-scale fisheries are not part of our decision making, because we are trying to promote equity and enhance equity in the fisheries industry. We have fisher-to-fisher meeting. We call it F2F. So every quarter, we meet with the fishermen, the local fisher folks. We ask them their problems, how best they can solve their own problems. We listen to them, we put down notes, and we formulate laws that will benefit the fisher folks, that's the small-scale fishers. So I'm very optimistic that in the future, if things, all other things be equal, we can promote equity in the fishery sector. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul and Mar.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'm mainly looking forward to the Food and Agriculture Organization's upcoming work on the IHH initiative to do in-country work as a next step to engage with interested governments and research institutes of some of the selected countries that we already work with in the project to discuss the variety of approaches and methodologies that we uncovered to highlight the contributions to small-scale fisheries, which often involve traditional and non-traditional approaches to estimate all kinds of metrics that still give you a good, robust picture of the contributions to small-scale fisheries. This next phase, the aim will be to discuss the lessons that were learned, including the main knowledge and data gaps and the barriers to improving national level accounting of small-scale fisheries in all aspects of the sustainable development space. and discuss what's the best way to support these countries to improve small-scale fisheries, multidisciplinary data collection, analysis, and use for improving the overall understanding of the sector. So we hope that these series of in-country processes continue to raise awareness on the different approaches that are available to improve our knowledge base at country levels, that raise interest in conducting follow-up work at country level with the support of the initiative to improve our understanding of small-scale fisheries, and more importantly, the identification of concrete roadmaps and next steps towards improving small-scale fisheries data at country level for participating countries. I think given the attention that the sector is receiving right now, and especially after this past year with the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture at IAFA, it's a great moment to dig deeper on what's the next new approach. So that's what I'm excited about.
Thank you, Mar. Thank you, panelists. Obviously, a lot of work to be done, but a lot of exciting, incredible opportunities. We're now going to open it up to audience questions. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, and we have a microphone floating around. While they're walking, I just want to acknowledge and say thank you to our panelists for sharing your incredible expertise. This has been really fascinating. Hi, my name's Emily Melvin. I'm a PhD student at the Duke Marine Lab. Thanks to the panel for a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. Mar, you had mentioned the certification programs and providing opportunities for small-scale fishers. And there's been some research showing that sometimes commodifying resources can really change social relations within the community, as well as relationships within between the community and the resource itself. And so I'm wondering how you balance, how we might think about balancing creating opportunities and livelihoods for fishers in these and incorporating them into these world markets with respecting the local social dynamics that are in place within these communities.
That's a great question. And this is, that comment was based on the work that we've been doing with our industry partners who have an interest in engaging more with the small-scale fisheries communities. And I think the biggest, it's a mutual interest, and in these cases, at least in the countries that we work with in Central America, it's a mutual interest for these small-scale actors to be considered, to be a part of to have access to these opportunities, even if it's for a certain time of the year or a certain period. And they face these initial barriers where they don't satisfy the usual requirements that bigger companies, that bigger industry retailers are asking for. So it's in a way it doesn't even allow them to participate in the conversations. So it's not even a conversation starter with if they don't have access to some of these programs or certifications, like I mentioned, or ratings or information that can convince these other actors to take them into consideration for the market. So I think it's in both of their interests in these cases, in these countries, but they struggle to make that communication barrier work. So they struggle to identify the common ground, I guess, of what the small scale actors can provide, and the companies to accept it as a sustainable practices. So I think it's more about allowing, or our work is more about allowing those bridges of communication to make sure that the basic requirements for sustainable fishing practices are there, and that there are industry partners can identify them without sometimes the barriers that the small scale fishers don't have. I don't know if that answered the question.
Thank you, everybody. Riveting panel. My name is Matilda from Singapore. I run Ocean Purpose Project. We work on plastic to hydrogen and seaweed and mussel bioremediation. I have a question for Paul, actually. I was really excited about what you were talking about with regards to the community engagement with fishers in Ghana. Could you share a little bit more about how you do that? Because we've all been reading a lot about the seaweed potential for hydrocolloids out of Ghana and how transitioning fishers into seaweed farming is a possibility. So how do you share some of the learnings that you get at like conferences like this or intel with fishers? I mean, I work with them. Is I spend a lot of budget on the beer budget, just trying to be able to, get them in a room and get them to listen to some of the work that we're doing. So maybe you could share some of your strategies and how, that's been working out in Ghana with the rest of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. That's a wonderful question. Yeah. Formerly, I was a technical assistant in the Fisheries Commission, and one of my key responsibility is to interact with the fishermen face to face on the grounds. So, we have districts and we have zones in the fisheries sector in Ghana. So, I'm in the AMA zone. So, AMA zone comprises of 6 landing beaches. We have Osu Landing Beach, we have La Landing Beach, we have Jamestown Landing Beach, we have Choco, we have Olamle, Manchuluemi, and that's small landing beaches. So, as a fisheries officer on the grounds, I'm supposed to interact with the fishermen, get their grievances, their problems, put them down at the end of the month, write a report on it, send it to the office. So the ministry, that's the policy making agency, and we are the implementing agency, the Fisheries Commission. They made a meeting and they were like, we are supposed to tackle the problems facing the small scale fishers from bottom up approach. So they contact those who are always with the fishermen on the grounds. How are we going to do it? Like the question you just asked. So we were like, every fishing community, there's a chief fisherman, and the fishers respect the chief fisherman. So we contact the chief fisherman of a community, assemble your men, but this day, we want to talk to them on the problems facing their industry. Small scale fishers, they are very happy to share their ideas, their problems when fishing industry players contact them. You see, so we go to the chief fisherman, we schedule a meeting, and it will interest you. They will come in their numbers. In Ghana, they don't go for fishing. The small scale industry, they don't go for fishing on Tuesdays. So if you want to interact with the fishermen, you have to engage them on Tuesdays. You see, so on Tuesdays we schedule a meeting and we call the policymakers from the office. We invite the stakeholders and the local community and everybody, and we come together and we interact. We call it fisher to fisher. We interact with the fishermen. A fisherman who express what if he thinks is employed in our policy will help them to rebuild the fish stock that is collapsing. We have a collapsing fish stock in Ghana. So how can we rebuild the fish stock that is collapsing? So we talk to them through fisher to fisher, through this meeting, and they come together and we share ideas together. So this is how we are able to engage the fishermen in the local community to get their inputs, how best we can come together as a community, as a whole, as a nation to solve their problems. So I think this is how we do it. I don't know whether I've answered your question. So if you want more on how you can engage your fishermen, you can contact me. I have the organizers have my phone number, my email, my contact. I can share more experience engaging fishermen. Yeah, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Do we still have time? Oh, great. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the panel for joining us from all corners. It's been really interesting to me, especially for a guy who studies whales and acoustics. So so forgive me if my question is naive. I tried to vet it a little bit with John just to make sure it's not completely naive. But the question is basically how big is small in the case of vis-a-vis small-scale fisheries, and specifically what I'm curious about is there's obviously a lot of benefits to the whole enterprise of small-scale fisheries and the equity it provides and so on. But as one fishery gets bigger and bigger, or one fishing community gets bigger and bigger, how do you maintain some of those benefits to the individual fishers, and do they break off into two smaller groups to self-govern? It just seems like as you get bigger and bigger, which is a positive problem, but I just wonder if there are thoughts on how do you scale those things? How do you scale them up? Thanks.
Who wants to begin?
So that's obviously a good problem to have. One thing that we're trying to do is establish local entities that capture and retain the value locally. So in our case, for instance, these are local fisheries management bodies. And what we're trying to do is basically create independent entities so that the FMB is not dependent on which government is currently in place, for instance, and so that the FMB can provide products and services that are useful to the entire coastal, fisheries ecosystem. And as they grow, they basically share some of their profits with the FMB, so that the FMB basically, as this kind of one-stop shop, can grow with them, and thereby kind of keeping, the value that is generated locally as well. So specifically, what we're trying to do is, for instance, establish solar ice making machines with FMBs. That way, ice as one of the key inputs for fishers, for fish buyers, for processors, is actually, manufactured locally at a reasonable price. And fishers have access to that resource. You can basically extend that to any kind of resource that is used by the local ecosystem, be it fishing gear, be it fuel, for instance, for the boats, and so on, or just a business center where sometimes even internet access is something that is useful to some of those remote communities. So that's one approach that we're actually taking.
Can I? So coming from the other side of the world, that's quite an interesting question, because it merits a nuanced answer from our context, right? So for example, in the Philippines, we measure, or we categorize fishing vessels, if it's commercial or large scale or medium scale commercial or artisanal fisher folk, in tonnage, gross tonnage of the boat, right? So if the artisanal fisher folk expands and business is good, it buys bigger boats, right? And then eventually it'll be better business for them, right? But there are a lot of issues, for example, like some artisanal fisher folk, due to the rights that are afforded to them, preferential access over municipal waters, for example, or nearshore fisheries, they try to maintain it at smaller boats, right? But they use industrial methods of fishing to go around it. So I would say there are some legal loopholes in there that merits a nuanced answer, but there are some ways as well. For example, like artisanal fisher folk band together and they make a cooperative that would make them afford to buy bigger boats, and that would actually increase or that would merit them to be smaller scale commercial fishing vessels in that context. So they actually raise their standards of living. They get more business because they have bigger boats. But then we also have all these other issues because a lot of these actors are actually going around the legal frameworks and the loopholes in the system. So there are some some considerations that we have to look at as well, and to fill the gaps and the loopholes.
Thank you. Do either of our virtual panelists want to weigh in? Oh, I think we have time for one more question. Oh, no, we don't. Just kidding. I want to again extend a real hearty thank you and acknowledgement to our panelists for sharing your incredible expertise, and thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Toddy Steelman, Dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment. The Nicholas School is proud to support this year's Blue Economy Summit, which aims to create a creative collision space to think about sustainable solutions for our oceans. At the Nicholas School, we value interdisciplinary approaches that tackle the world's most complex problems, and the Blue Economy Summit represents the best in this tradition. Thank you very much for being part of this exciting event. I look forward not only to the conversations that we will have, but the creativity that you will all bring to making our oceans more sustainable.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, I'm just going to black these out because this is, I'm not a fan of the software necessarily with. All right, so I want.
communities where that tourism is happening. I think having conversations between different stakeholders, between researchers and tourists, it's an important aspect of learning more and being educated on the issue of what sustainability is.
Figure out what